Hello, welcome back to another episode of Geared Toward Gear. My name is Sean and I'm glad that you are here. If you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. Check out some of my previous content. If you're interested, please do subscribe. Also in the description, you'll find links to my social media accounts. Facebook and Instagram primarily is where I do most of my social media. And there you'll see, photos and kind of previews of upcoming content. And in the future, I'll probably do some exclusive stuff like giveaways through those platforms. So today we're going to be talking about something, I guess, a little different than what I've done previously on this channel, and that is sentimental knives. Knives that just mean a lot to me. Most of these, actually all of these, were given to me as gifts. And so with Valentine's Day coming up, I was just thinking about, being sentimental and pulled out a few knives that are very sentimental to me. And I'll try to keep this brief, and I've said that before and gone over on time, but I'll try to keep it around like 12 minutes, hopefully. So with that said, let's get into it. So the first knife that I ever owned was a Buck Model 503 Prince, rosewood handle, nickel bolsters, lockback design, very classic, been around for 30 plus years from Buck, and they still make them today. This is not that exact knife. I actually lost my first knife and I was devastated. So a number of years later, my parents, for some occasion, maybe it was my birthday or Christmas, they bought me the same knife that they bought me when I was 7 years old. And this time they had it engraved with the year that they originally gave it to me, which is 1992 when I was 7. So you can figure out how old I am based on the math there. They also put my initials on the other side. And so this one means a lot to me that they took the time to repurchase my first ever knife. So I can always remember that this was the first model of knife that I ever owned. The Buck 503 made in the USA. So I love this thing. Means a good deal to me. The second one, we'll talk about a few knives my dad gave me. So this one belonged to my dad. It has his initials on it. It was given to him as a gift. And it's a Gerber. We'll see on the blade here, on the main blade, we'll see Gerber International. And on the back side it says Silver Knight, which I guess was the model number, and then Japan. So it was made in Japan. It does have a secondary smaller blade as well, and this nice little kind of bird dog scene on this faux ivory material. And when I was a kid, like most young boys, I went through my dad's stuff all the time, through his drawers when he wasn't home or when he was at work or after school. And he had some cool stuff because he was a cop for a while, and he had pocket knives and flashlights and Zippos and handcuffs and just cool stuff for kids to play with and get in trouble with. And so I remember vividly seeing this knife in my dad's dresser drawers constantly throughout my life. And some years later, he gave it to me as a gift. So that means a good deal to me as well. Back here, we have a Buck Model 192. And this is another USA-made Buck, a fixed blade, obviously. And if you're wondering about the cork, that's just how I choose to display it in my cabinet instead of buying an expensive display, case or something like that. So and if you're going to do that, make sure you use an older, really dried out cork so you don't get any acids or anything like that on the blade. But my dad and I were walking through a mall, a classic American shopping mall, which they're becoming less and less these days with online shopping. But this particular mall where we lived had a knife shop, a brick and mortar knife store, family owned. I think it was called House of Blades, if I'm not mistaken. And we walked in one day, as we often did, and I could never go to this mall without entering this store just because I could look at all the knives, I could handle them. And on this particular day, probably 10 or 15 years ago, my dad just said, pick something, whatever you want. And they had a number of knives, to choose from, and I didn't have a ton of fixed blades at the time, and so this just kind of jumped out at me with its classic shape and the polished wood handle and the brass. And so I said, that's what I want. And he bought it for me, and I've had it ever since, and I love it. I don't use it for hunting. I've got a few other knives that I prefer for hunting, and then again, the sentimentality, I just kind of keep it as a display piece. So that's it for knives from my parents and or dad. So let's move on to grandparents. So my grandfather, who's 91 years old, bought me this knife about 8 years ago. It's a trapper design, so you got your clip point blade and your spay blade. It's made by a company called Stour, and they're not super well known, but they make some decent stuff. Not super expensive, not super cheap either. And he ordered this through a mail order catalog, probably 8 or 9 years ago. He knows that I love knives, and he saw it and he bought it for me. I had no idea it was coming. It showed up on my doorstep, and just thought that was super generous of him to think of me and to buy this and send it to me. And I probably wouldn't buy a knife like this on my own, but once I saw it, the abalone and just the reflectiveness and the iridescence with the brass inlays and the file work on the back, it's just a really pretty knife, and it means a lot to me that he thought of me and had that sent to me. Down here we have a little guy that kind of reminds me of a Swiss Army Classic, and this belonged to my wife's grandfather, and there's his initials, GGK. And this is an Italian knife made by a company called, if I can get a good picture here, Elico, made in Italy. It's got one single little pen blade, as you see there, and then it's got two other tools. It's got a flat-bladed screwdriver and a very well-used nail file on the back here. On the top, it's really interesting. It's got this track and this little button. And so if you push it forward in this direction, it's going to expose tweezers. And if you slide it in the other direction, it's going to expose a pair of scissors. And I had never seen a design like that, quite like that before. And so I thought that was really neat. It was given to my wife when her grandfather passed away a number of years ago, and she gave it to me. So that means a lot that she did that. Let's move on to these two knives here. Were both given to me by a close friend and mentor named Brent. The first is a Case Texas toothpick. You can still get these all day long. Classic design from Case. This one has kind of a amber brown polished iridescent handle scale that's very attractive. And the Texas toothpick, again, is just a classic design from Case. And I live in Texas, and so he gave me that. I don't remember if it was for a promotion that he gave me or just because he's a nice guy and he knew I love knives, but he gave me that, and it means a lot to me. And then this one he gave me is a Uncle Henry, as you can see here, Uncle Henry. And it's made by Schrade, of course. And this is a USA-made Schrade, which they stopped making Schrades in the U.S. probably 10 years ago, maybe. If I'm wrong on that, you can correct me in the comments. But they haven't made Schrades in the U.S. in a while. It's got a jig bone handle, lockback design, again, very classic traditional knife. And I do love my traditional knives, even though I haven't talked a lot about them on the channel. I really do enjoy them. And this was brand new in the box when he gave it to me. It's probably 10 years old, and it was only a couple years ago that he gave it to me, but he had acquired a few of them at his previous job and just held on to them. So although it's probably 10 or 15 years old, it was brand new in the box when he gave it to me. So I love that knife, and it means a lot that he thought of me. So lastly, on the table, the elephant on the table is the Buck 119. And this is a very recognizable design from Buck. The Model 119, again, made in the USA. You've probably seen this in movies or video games, maybe, I don't know. But it's got a black Delrin handle, polished nickel bolster and accents, and just a cool-looking knife. And this was a gift from my older brother for my 30th birthday, and he had it engraved with the word 30 just spelled out, which I thought was tasteful, didn't take away from the knife, and something different. Most people might put the number 30 or the Roman numerals for 30, but he chose to spell it out, and I just think it looks very attractive. And I'll always remember this as a 30th birthday gift from my big bro. So that one means a good deal to me. So the last two are identical knives, and they have a really crazy story. It really is. It's an interesting story. So here's one of them. So my wife and I had our only child about 2 years ago. And so he was born in April, and a couple months later was Father's Day. And we went out to dinner with my wife, my son, myself, and her parents, my in-laws. And my wife gave me a gift, and it was this knife. And this knife is not great quality. It won't cut anything. It's about like a butter knife. Not my style. Didn't really love it, but I thought, my wife bought me a knife. And it's the only knife she's ever bought me. And so for that reason, it's very sentimental. But then I turned it over and I saw in the pocket clip that she had it engraved with Dad 2017 to commemorate the year that I became a father. So this means the world to me that she did that and had it engraved for me. And so for that reason, this is one of my favorite knives of all time. So fast forward 1 week. 1 week later, my parents, who live about 5 hours away, came into town to spend some time with me and my wife and their new grandson. And again, we went out to dinner, this time with my parents and my wife and my son. And we were kind of celebrating Father's Day because they weren't in town, obviously, on Father's Day. And at the dinner table, they give me a box. It's the exact same box from the same store. This one came from Houston. This one came from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But the exact same store, same knife. I'm thinking, great, another, not very useful knife. But then again, I turned it over and I saw this. If I can get my fingerprints off of it. Dad 4/10/17. And that is the date that I became a father for the first time. So that's my son's birthday. And so it's just so eerie and odd and weird and cool that my wife and my parents both bought me the exact same knife from the exact same store, had it engraved in a very similar fashion, and they had no idea that they were doing this. It was a complete coincidence, and at the dinner table, when I got the second one and I told them the story about this one, like nobody could believe it, that they both happened to choose the same knife from the same store and have the pocket clip engraved in a very similar fashion. The blade on this one for my parents also does have my son's full name engraved on it. And I'm not going to show that just because privacy, but yeah, two identical knives engraved as Father's Day gifts to commemorate me becoming a dad. So if I could get rid of all my 150 plus knives and only keep two, it would be these two, hands down, no question about it. So those are my sentimental knives. And I'm not the type that ever gets rid of knives, certainly not ones that are sentimental, but I've never sold a knife ever in my life. I've never traded for a knife ever in my life. If I don't like it for whatever reason, I give it away. And so I've given away a lot of knives, but I hang on to most of them. And these are the ones that mean the most to me and will eventually be given to my son when he gets old enough. And I may actually just give him this for his 7th birthday because I think that's a good age for a kid to get his first knife, and he can have the one that his dad got for his 7th birthday, or at least the model. So that is my sentimental knife collection, and I really like to hear from you guys. What are your most sentimental, prized knives that were maybe gifts or have a story behind them? I'd really like to hear kind of a brief story in the comments if you wouldn't mind sharing. And a lot of these knives you can still get, the buck models, you can still get all of those, the case, toothpick obviously. So I'll leave links if you're interested in any of these in the description. But I'd really like to hear what your sentimental knives or first knives were, because I think it would be neat to hear and maybe give me an idea on a knife that I need to buy if it's one that's still available. So again, in the description, I'll leave links to anything that's still currently available. And again, my Facebook and Instagram accounts are linked down there as well. I've been posting pictures, some kind of previews on upcoming content. So if you're a subscriber already, please do check out those links and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. You'll get some additional content there. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you very soon.